This is the fourth year, Brad. And Om, this is your first year.
Is it?
And yeah, in Iceland.
Oh, okay.
You've been reborn.
You know, it's like, really? Well, it is officially.
I wanted to thank you both because you're both very busy and you made it to Iceland. Thank you very much. First context and first impressions. Start with you, Om. First impressions of Iceland.
I wish you hadn't told me it was summer in Iceland. It's really, really, really cold.
Yep.
Yep. I think there should be a statutory warning against everything you say. Everything you say, not take it down to. It is so cold. Yeah. But great pictures. Yeah. I like my Instagram feed is blowing up. So I know it's been great. Like it's been, yes, I have not slept very much, and it's been like I've been out and about. But I was surprised by how friendly people are, and it's been great fun. So thank you for having us.
Thank you. Brad, last time you were here, it's 2012, when you kicked off Startup Iceland. So what brings you back other than house hunting?
I was hoping the hole in the ground next door would be filled in by now.
We'll talk about that during dinner.
You brought me back.
Yeah.
I was happy to come back and spend some more time. For those of you that don't know me, I have a house in Alaska. And Iceland and Alaska actually feel, in a lot of ways, similar to me. So it's always actually quite comfortable. The first time that I came here with Amy, and it was like, wow, this is totally comfortable to us. So it's nice to be back.
Except no Sarah Palin.
Sarah Palin doesn't really live in Alaska. She lives on Fox News.
Okay.
It's actually in a box. They put her in a box.
That's right.
They don't let her out of that room anymore.
That's true. But also you have oil in Alaska, and these guys just don't use very much oil.
That's a good point.
Well,
apart from that, it's pretty much the same.
Well, there's lots of people thinking that we should be looking at oil in Iceland.
Okay.
Anyway, moving on, kicking gears. Let's talk about fear, doubt, and uncertainty of entrepreneurship and starting up. You both meet and talk and mentor and invest in founders. You both are founders yourselves and entrepreneurs. So what is your take on the FUD of entrepreneurship?
Well, you started with a bunch of loaded words, right? What were they? Fear, doubt, uncertainty. I started my first company when I was 19, and I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. And when I sold that company when I was 27, I still had no idea what I was doing. And now I'm 49 and I've invested in lots and lots of companies, and I still have no idea what I'm doing. And I think one of the things that's amazingly cool about entrepreneurship is that you can bring a beginner's mind to what you're doing on a continual basis. I have a blog post I wrote a couple months ago that's headlined, "Something new is fucked up in my world every day." And I don't mean something is fucked up in my world. I mean every day something new appears that's fucked up. And if it hasn't revealed itself by about 4 p.m, I start to become curious as to what it's going to be. And I think this is a thread that goes all the way through my own experience as an entrepreneur, is that no matter how much time you spend at the craft of helping, creating, building, investing in companies, there's always new stuff that's completely unexpected. There's always disappointments, things that you have no idea where they're going to come from or how they're going to get resolved when they appear. And no matter how good things are going, there's always lurking around the corner the next near-death experience for the business. And once you accept that as an entrepreneur, it makes all of the scary words like fear, doubt, uncertainty, whatever, less scary. I mean, they're still no fun. You don't go searching it out. But you kind of accept that that's what the process is. And, oh, by the way, not that different than life, right? I mean, I have very famous executive who lost his son to cancer in his early 20s, who said afterwards, life is a fatal disease. And you kind of step back from it. My chemistry friends like to say that life is a process of continuous oxidation.
They took my punchline there.
I'm sorry, I stole that from you. But I think what I'd leave with is, if you start from the frame of reference that this stuff is just really hard, and it doesn't necessarily get easier as you become more successful, it just gets a different kind of difficult. That's a good place to start from, because then you'll actually enjoy the challenge even when the challenge is smacking you in the face over and over again.
Well, I think Brad put it very well. So I will add to it. Fear, doubt, and uncertainty are the words used by people who want a very predictable life. If you are looking for a predictable paycheck, you do not want uncertainty. You always doubt anything new, and you're fearful of what you don't know. If you're a real founder, you don't think about those words. You just say, I am going to bask in this wonderland of completely, not knowing anything about anything except this belief that I am completely convinced about. Every successful founder has that conviction. I think if you look, and I've met many of them in my life, and you look at the ones who are more successful, have a conviction in their ideas. They're not dogmatic, but they have a very strong conviction. They never use words like fear, doubt, and uncertainty. They fear missing out. They fear working less. They fear not being able to do a good job. They fear of letting themselves down. And I think those are the real entrepreneurs in my mind, because they are trying to push what their capabilities are. I think, just to contextualize, people who are looking for more predictable things in life are all the people, they look for fear, doubt, and uncertainty by going skiing and sky jumping and stuff like that. If you're a founder, you just do that every morning at 4 o'clock when your server crashes, or or Amazon servers crash these days.
Right.
Fear. I want one more comment on the word fear. How many people here are fans of Dune? John Biggs is a fan of Dune Wars, or Dune Trek. I can't remember which one. Dune Trek. In Dune, there's a great line, which is "Fear is the mind killer," and it's part of a soliloquy. But in the context of entrepreneurship, fear often is the mind killer because it creates paralysis. It creates your inability to decide what to do. And as an entrepreneur, you can't ever have paralysis. You have to keep moving. Either you're chasing something or something's chasing you. And to let yourself get locked is, in many ways, as an entrepreneur, the most dangerous place to be. And I think fear is often the thing that drives that.
Thank you. Om, you've had a tough year, to say the least. He's like, what are you talking about?
You got a hug from me?
Yeah?
That's pretty good.
No, I just wanted to hear your thoughts on learnings from GigaOM. And I know it is still fresh in your memory, but what would be your advice to founders and entrepreneurs from that experience?
Ooh.
I know. You
And in
got
140 characters.
Yes.
Right? Wow.
My work here is done. I'll get out.
Did you set him up for this? No. It seems like it. You call it a tough year. I would just say a year of learning more than anything else. I left in January 2014 from the company, and with the idea that things would be peachy, and like Brad just said, life isn't like a straight line. It's like a lot of squiggly lines, and then you die. I mean, that's what it really is. It is the fact. But from my standpoint, what happened. There was a place and a time for GigaOM and for the company. What I have learned from it is that it isn't over till it's over, and it's never over. I think that is the quintessential startup reality is you may go start this company and say 3 years later, I have a new CEO and, it's over as a founder. No, it's not. It's never over. It's not over till you go public or your company's, the doors are shut. It is always, the story continues. I think a lot of people, I've had few friends who've become successful whose companies have gone public. Aaron Levy is a perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
I met him when he was literally a kid from college, and he just went public. People have no understanding of his motivations. They just have understanding of what they think are his motivations, right? So from my standpoint, that was the biggest realization, was that it's never over. And perhaps that was the biggest takeaway from the whole GigOm experience for me.
Thank you for sharing. I had a line here where I was going to say, if you don't feel comfortable about it, you don't have to say it. I took it out. So thankfully I did. Because maybe you would have said pass. Brad, coming back to you. You are the Yoda of VC world, or at least somebody has said that. And you've quoted...
Said that, not I.
Yes. But you were voted as the most respected VC in the Valley.
Yeah, by some bullshit SEO thing.
But you've also quoted that masters, the difference between a master and a student is that the master has failed more times than the student has ever tried. Can you give some of your failures so people can see some context to the challenges that they're facing? I know you...
Sure. I'll tell the very short version of my biggest failure. I was a co-founder in 1996 of a company originally called Sage Networks. We raised $42 million, 2 from the founders. There were 4 of us, and 40 from a private equity firm. That company merged just before it went public with a company and changed its name to Interliant. Interliant was a company we merged with. We went public in 1999. It actually took us twice to go public. The first time we tried to go public, we went on the road show. We had a very oversubscribed book, very exciting public offering, and then we could not clear the SEC because we'd done a whole bunch of acquisitions and just could not get through the SEC process, even though every day the investment banker said, don't worry, tomorrow we'll be done. A couple months later, we tried again. We went public. Successful IPO. We continued to do acquisitions. We got up to about a little bit under a $3 billion market cap, and did a debt financing that was a $160 million debt financing. And the idea of the debt financing was that the debt would convert into equity when your stock went up 15% from the point of the debt financing. Merrill Lynch had come up with this approach. Henry Blodgett who runs Business Insider now, was the analyst at Merrill Lynch. And they did this for 30 companies because it was a very easy way to raise more money that theoretically was going to convert to equity. 2 years later, 29 of the 30 companies they did that deal for were bankrupt, including Interliant. So the debt never converted. As a company, we were about a $200 million company at the peak. We had mastered the art of losing $5 million a month. No matter how hard we tried, no matter what we did, we could guarantee that we could lose $5 million a month every month. Revenue, not so obvious what we were going to have, even though it was a recurring revenue-based business, but we were so fucking good at losing $5 million a month. And I can't remember, I think it was 2001, Barron's had a cover article on their, they come out with their thing on Sunday, and they had a cover article that said the 100 internet companies that'll be bankrupt in 12 months. And Interliant was like number 17 on the list. And we weren't number 1, thank God. But you read that article, the first thing that happens is you have just this sort of feigned indignance. Oh, how could they possibly stick us on that list? This is a bullshit article. It's completely wrong. What assholes. They didn't even call us to do research. And then you think about it for a little bit, and you're like, yeah, they may be right. we might be really screwed here. We were not the 17th to go bankrupt on that list, but we were probably the 74th. We hung in there longer than a lot of others. The company went bankrupt. None of us as founders took any money out. All of our equity was linked to the private equity firm's investment. And they took a $40 million investment that they wrote up to over $1 billion of value all the way back down to zero. We went through the bankruptcy. For anybody that's ever been through a bankruptcy in the U.S., it's, especially when you're a public company, it's a particular torturous process. The company was actually cash flow positive when it went bankrupt, but we had this $160 million debt overhang, so the equity was worthless. We went through bankruptcy, finished the bankruptcy, discharged, everybody signs their documents saying this misery is over, and the judge bangs his gavel, and there's $3 million left that goes to something called the Post-Confirmation Creditors Committee, and their job is to allocate the remaining $3 million. They decided to take that $3 million and sue me and all the directors for $150 million for fraud. Now in the US, it's not illegal to fail. That's really fortunate. And it turns out that most public companies have a thing called a directors and officers liability policy, so they're really going after that. In this particular case, in 2000, this was about 2004 by the time it's 2003 by the time this went down. There were guys like, Bernie Eggers going to, one of your good friends, right, Bernie?
Yeah.
Going to jail for WorldCom. Ohm wrote a great book about these crazy people and all this crazy shit that happened. What was the name of the book?
Broad Bandits.
Broad Bandits. And, they were going to jail for fraud, right? What was Skilling's name? Jeff Skilling from Enron. So, you get sued for $150 million for fraud when people are getting hauled off to jail. It doesn't feel so good. Of course, the very first thing our D&O policy holder does, who, by the way, ironically, is a company called AIG. Anybody remember them? Yeah. The very first thing they did was they sent us a letter. This is all, when I say send a letter, it's by fax. This is not email, this is not mail, this is like faxes. A fax machine is one of those machines that goes, never mind. The letter says, sorry, you're not covered for fraud. We're not going to cover you for this $150 million lawsuit. This is more money than I ever thought about, period. And, we had to threaten to sue AIG. 3 years of this goes by, and at the end of the 3 years, the people that had the $3 million got a settlement from AIG for $600,000. So by my calculation, it's a bad trade. They should have taken the $3 million. They spent the $3 million to get $600,000. But that was from 1996 to 2005 was when it was finally over, and it was from 0 to $3 billion to negative $150 million. And during that period of time, I was involved in lots of other things, so don't feel sad for me. But it really teaches you how to deal with, and not just deal with, but compartmentalize the stress and anxiety of that. So how many people here, maybe you don't want to raise your hand because something illegal about raising your hand when you get asked this question in Iceland, there's probably some regulation somewhere. But if you've ever been sued, just raise your hand in your head. You have to raise your hand. Yeah. The first document you get, that's telling about all the bad things you did is like this long. And the document said, basically the first page, Brad Feld kills babies. He doesn't discriminate. He kills attractive babies and unattractive babies of both genders. And then he chops up the babies into little pieces. And then he microwaves the pieces. And after he microwaves them, he deep fries the pieces. And then he eats them. And then he kills some more babies. And that was like the first of 200 pages. And you read something like this, it's so disheartening. It's like, I don't recognize any of this stuff. But that's the kind of process that happens in this dynamic. And being able to abstract away and recognize it's just part of the process. It was actually a useful tool that I learned from that.
Thank you. That puts a lot of things in context. Let's jump on to startup communities. You guys travel a lot. You go to different places. A lot of founders talk to you from different communities. It's been 5 years or 4.5 years since you wrote the book, Startup Communities. What's the state of the union?
It's actually only been 3.5. It came out in 2012.
Yeah, 3.5.
When I wrote Startup Communities, the phrase startup communities didn't exist. People didn't call these things startup communities. They called them best case entrepreneurial ecosystems, but a lot of technology clusters, innovation clusters. There was, even in 2011, there was this pretty heavy bias that you had to be in the Bay Area to create a successful tech company. The bias was starting to shift. There was always Boston feeling like they had a chip on their shoulder, and that's the perpetual story of Boston since they can't seem to win a World Series.
They've won 3 of them, dude.
3 of them.
I was on the losing end of it.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah. Damn it.
Yeah,
you had to bring it.
I guess they eventually won some World Series. I'm a Boston Red Sox
Yes.
fan. And you know, New York would show up in some of the conversations. And the thing that prompted me to write Startup Communities was in 2010, the conversation that caused me to start to reflect on, people were talking about this new wave of entrepreneurship happening in places like Silicon Valley. People didn't say San Francisco. People didn't say Bay Area. They said Silicon Valley, New York, Boston, and Boulder. And one of those 4 things is not like the other. Like Boulder literally fits in a building in downtown New York. The entire city of Boulder fits in one Manhattan skyscraper. Right? The Transamerica Tower in San Francisco, I think Boulder fits in the Transamerica Tower. It gets a little skinny at the top, so it'll be a little tight.
You can ski down from there.
You can. So I just started thinking about what the dynamics were around this town of 100,000 people that caused there to be this level of entrepreneurial activity that was visible nationally, internationally, and what made all that work. And that's what prompted the book Startup Communities. When I reflect on the book, 3 or 4 years later, I had no idea how impactful the language would be. So I think as any author, and Om's written some books, when you write a book, you don't really have any sense as to whether what you're talking about is going to have impact or not. And you don't know until you look backwards. The phrase startup communities now is being used all around the world to describe this phenomena. That, if nothing else, that was meaningful contribution, feels good. You know, the Boulder thesis and the language around the Boulder thesis, which is the leaders have to be entrepreneurs, you have to take a very long-term view, at least 20 years, you have to be inclusive of anyone who wants to engage at any level, and you have to have activities and events that engage the entire entrepreneurial stack in entrepreneurship. While today that may seem fairly obvious, even in 2012 it wasn't that obvious, and a good set of themes like that or a good thesis should be obvious in hindsight, so that feels pretty good. There were a lot of things that I reflect on the book that I messed up. One was I made this linkage or this differentiation between leaders and feeders, where the leaders were entrepreneurs and feeders were everybody else, government, university, nonprofits, investors. And I didn't mean for feeders to be a pejorative phrase. Both leaders and feeders are super important, but by the language that I used, I ended up being stuck in that pejorative dynamic. So I should have called them apples and papayas or, ants and caterpillars or something. The other thing which, when I reflect on the book, is that I emphasize that you have to take a long-term view, but it's so hard for us as human beings to do that. And I get asked over and over and over again as I wander around the planet and talk about this stuff. People say, how are we doing? How are we doing relative to something? How are we doing relative to the Bay Area? Or how are we doing relative to how we did 2 years ago? And the answer is irrelevant question. Like, that's just not what's interesting. What's interesting is, are you doing these things with this very, very long-term view, and is that having impact on you? Om said something a few minutes ago, life is a squiggly line. Like, the idea that any of this stuff is a nice, steady curve is a wonderful fantasy that's a total fantasy. And in fact, many of the disruptive innovation that we're dealing with may look like, at some points in time, a straight line, but it's because it's a geometric curve, and you're just looking at a very small part of the line.
The whole idea of startup communities, which one point I would like to make, which is, slightly different from Brad's. I feel most people are so tied into the idea of technology startups for startup communities, which is somewhat insane because, there is no the idea of a pure tech startup, what is like a fashion startup or what is like a watch company. These are all changing. So if you define yourself as a startup community, you have to be a little bit more inclusive than just tech. I think there is newer companies are going to come up around fashion, for example, or even shoes, for example, right? People are going to do interesting things, and there are new models which are being developed now, which make all that feasible. Like Kickstarter as a pre-order phenomena for jeans or shoes has become a very predictable way. So are those companies tech companies? Are they fashion companies? Are they not startups because they're not they don't code as much and they use code? So I think we have to take a little bit wider lens on what a startup is. And secondly, if you need to define yourself geographically, what you are good at. New York is good at media, fashion, banking, and advertising. So if they produce startups in that area, they are doing better than Silicon Valley. If you guys are better at, there was a company which was pitching, wearables for animals to keep track of animals on the farms and stuff. If that is your key skill set as a country or as a region, that you should be very proud of the fact that that's your key skill set and measure that as a relative sign of success, not what Silicon Valley is like saying, are all Hollywood movies great, or versus is Bollywood movies are different, and BBC makes great movies and so does BBC Ireland. I think BBC Ireland makes better movies than BBC UK, for example, right? So from that standpoint, that's how you have to think. You have to contextualize where you're coming from, what you're good at, and not just be confined to a simple set of just tech startups. I think the valuation of the non-tech companies is a whole different story, but like you have to have a bigger picture in your mind now.
I can't underscore that enough. I think if you've read Startup Communities, one of the things I talked about was the 5 parallel universes in Boulder, which were tech, clean tech, bio, natural foods, and something called LOHAS, which is lifestyle, outdoors, health, and sustainability. And those 5 communities historically didn't overlap and integrate particularly well. Some of those things have changed over the last 3 or 4 years as people have put some effort into trying to get cross-fertilization. But if you take that construct, that it's not just a tech phenomena, and then go to what Om said, which is that every place has its special magic. And the key is to put all of your energy as a startup community behind your special magic. It doesn't mean that other people can't do other things, but you look for, why do people want to be in Iceland? Why do people want to be in Reykjavik? Why do people want to be in Boulder? Why do people want to be in Kansas City? Why do people want to be in Detroit? Why do people want to be in Helsinki? Each place, not just in terms of the skill set of the people, in terms of your special magic, but the types of companies and the types of products and the types of things that people consume, that is a self-reinforcing phenomenon. And the mistake I think a lot of folks make is to say, oh, we need to look like that. And, well, if you want to look like that, go to that, versus create your own special magic where you are.
And just to add to that, the reason for that is actually more logic than you think. Because if you're working in advertising and you have an advertising startup and you're in New York, some of the best minds in advertising are in New York or in Mountain View. I mean, depending on which side of the spectrum. Similarly, if you have some of the best minds in fashion are going to be either in New York or in somewhere in France, right, in Paris and stuff. So I think those are the things which are special. And the other most important thing about being more inclusive of other industries and other special, like non-tech startups is they actually contextualize even tech startups more. They give you a deeper, wider understanding of products when you're actually making products that impact real humans, right? The people in the fashion industry know a lot more about, how to wear things than people in Silicon Valley do about making fashion. So learning those things is, it's Apple is a perfect example. So, but you can't do that as a startup. So why not have more interesting people in your cluster so that your cluster is more interesting all the time?
Great segue, because I have tons of questions, but I think we have very little time, so I'm going to jump to the end. About the future, lots of uncertainty about the future are, in my opinion, going to be solved by people with definitive optimism. That is, that they're going to build the future that's going to solve a lot of the challenges we face. What's your take on that?
So uncertainty is an opportunity to invent the future, in my opinion, period. Like if you're uncertain about things, you don't know. So what you don't know, you can create, right? As simple as that. And a lot of people are going to try and a lot of people are going to fail. But I personally believe this is the single most exciting time to be alive. I've been saying it since 2011, by the way. I feel just like we had industrialization, when the steam engine and the wheel came together, we had a whole different level of change in society. And industrialization, which changed everything, it led to different kinds of wars, it led to different kind of economics, different kind of commerce, different kind of food, eating habits, the whole 9 yards, right? The British Empire rose from that. We have the same thing happening just about now. The steam engine of the modern age, which is the processor, has been untethered. It has gone into our pocket, into our wrist, it is essentially, we have combined the engine and the mobility one more time to what I like to think of as the internetization of our entire society. So uncertainty which is coming from that is, there are two kinds of uncertainties. One is of displacement and one is of opportunity. Remember, just like the industrialization created different food habits for different people, right? Fish and chips were not native to England, and they did because the fish were brought in on trains. Similarly, we invented restaurants at that time because of the way the society changed. We are having all those changes right now. This is a 50-year cycle. We are going to keep making interesting things happen. We just don't know what those interesting things are in the future. We know what one interesting thing we want to make. And as long as you know that, that is where you can focus as an entrepreneur. And as somebody who looks to help, invest as an investor, help entrepreneurs make it real, I think that's what we look for, that one person who has this one singular focus of inventing a future which he or she thinks is supposed to look like. That is the opportunity, and uncertainty equals that opportunity. That's how I feel about it. I don't know about you, Brad.
I don't feel much uncertainty. I'm operating under the premise that the machines have already taken over. And that they're waiting very patiently for us because we're doing a lot of their work for them by putting all this data into them. And so, they're just taking their time. I happen to be very optimistic about the future in terms of the dynamics between humans and machines. So I think you run into, lots and lots of people who are fatalistic or Pollyannish about, the notion of an AI and artificial intelligence. Any sort of advanced intelligence. I actually like the phrase advanced intelligence better than artificial intelligence at this point. I think also if you're a reader of science fiction, I read a huge amount of science fiction because I find it the most interesting way to teleport myself into the future. I also like to read science fiction from the past about today. It's actually quite interesting to read Asimov and Heinlein and their books that were set in sort of the early 21st century and see what they got right and what they got wrong. And if you want some really crazy shit, Philip K. Dick is even more crazy on that vector of what he got right and what he got wrong. The seeds of that link to what Om's saying is that we're in a period where, as a society, there's going to be a significant amount of change that happens in the next 50 years is a good time frame. Could be, 20, 30, 40. I'm 49. I hope that I'm still around through most of this extreme change. And a lot of it is going to come to this fundamental notion of what it is to be human. I think that if you look at where we are today, and generationally, if you stop at about age 15, I think most people, maybe 20, have a pretty good sense of what it is to be human from 20 up. I think if you think about somebody who's 5 today, when they're in their 20s, 20 years from now, the notion of what it means to be human is going to be a lot more complicated because of this linkage between humans and machines. And it's not just the intellectual linkage, it's not just the access to information that no longer do we have to either speak into a phone and then press the button again and speak into the phone again because it got it wrong, and then press the button and speak into the phone again and then got it wrong, and then swear at the phone and this time type what you want. Right? If Siri worked properly or Google Now worked properly, you wouldn't have to do that. That'll get there. But more importantly, it's that the physical dynamics of how it's going to work. The idea that once humans are augmented, and not just sort of military exoskin augmented, but augmented in lots of different ways, what is a machine versus what is human? Is it a computer-enhanced human or a human-enhanced machine? And the societal problems of this are extreme. And if you want a taste of it, how many people here have watched Battlestar Galactica? Okay, a bunch, right? So the TV show, not the 1970s one, which sucked, the 2003 to 2007 one, which was quite epic. It's not a movie about space, and it's not a movie about the future. It's a movie about society and human beings as they encounter their mortality as a species in the face of a machine that is now equal to or greater than an intelligence collectively in there. I think this is what we're going to be dealing with as a species. And we're not going to be dealing with it uniformly across our planet, and we're not going to be dealing with it uniformly across society. But it's something that we just simply don't understand, that we're in the midst of creating. And it's going to be pretty profound. So again, I'll come at it from an optimistic perspective rather than a fatalistic perspective. I think people kill people, not machines kill machines, right? If we imbue machines with the idea that they should kill people, then that's coming from humans, not from machines. I think we can do quite the opposite as a society, but I think we're going to have to work hard at it.
I think the one point to note in this is that, most of human history has been about individual humans deciding for other humans. And now collective human hive, aka the machine we are programming with our own data, is going to make decisions on behalf of us, and we don't know how to deal with it. I think the Facebook recommendations of people I should friend with is a perfect example of a machine making collective decisions on the data I have dropped around the web. I think that is entirely feasible for us to take responsibility for that. I think right now the way we are programming the machines, they lack a lot of that nuance, and because it hasn't been necessary. I think the software in the future will have to have much more nuance and depth, which is like non-software elements have to be brought into the software. I think a speaker earlier this morning was mentioning the things like utility and creativity into software. I think that those are very real things. The creation of software and the software which will run the machines is going to have to adapt to the new reality, and I think we are going to adapt with it. Like, think about it this way. Look at Google, right? Before Google, everybody saved bookmarks. That can be an efficient way of saving things. Right now, we just don't do that. We just go to Google and find things. Nicholas Carr said, is Google making us dumb? Well, 99.95% are actually dumb, right? I mean, if they were not, they would be geniuses, and they are, so it's easier to have a machine help them. So what's wrong with those kind of augmentations? Just monitoring how those augmentations are done and adapted in the future. That is the policy and philosophical question of next 50 years. Unfortunately, I find our politicians are more than inept, and they don't know what to do. They don't even know how to read their own emails. So I think that is the challenge we have to overcome. That's a human challenge. That's not a machine challenge. The friction is entirely human, not machine.
Well, the last comment that Om made is a really important one. Our existing social and governance structures that we have put in place as society, again, not uniformly across society, right? Because you have different types of social structures and different types of decision making in different geographies, in different companies, different countries. You have that in different cultures. The structures generally that have been put in place are simply not able to keep up with both the change in the underlying technology and the rate of the change. And so we see this in the U.S. already, which is that we have many, many laws around privacy, technology, our FCC, our FTC, our patent system, all this stuff, surveillance. The law does not keep up with the technology, and so it takes a while, and by the time the law is changed, if it even gets changed, the technology has moved on beyond it. This is again, a precursor. It's just, it's just a little tiny taste of what's to come, because it's going to be so much more complex and happening so much faster.
Yeah. I think I'm way out of time. Yon is like,
we got a red card. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen a yellow or a red card yet.
I've been given the yellow card, now the red card. So I want to leave at that. I think there's a lot of thought that's going in my head, and a lot of questions in my head.
You can go ask him.
Yeah.
Ignore that guy. You're the boss. I mean, come on. You can just go with it. That's what I used to do in my conferences.
But I'm not the boss. The boss is outside.
She's not here.
She's not here yet.
But you can go pretend to be a boss for now.
Sorry, Augustin. So anyway, I want to just say thank you guys. I think it's been fascinating to have you here. Fortunate to have you as mentors tomorrow. Really looking forward to the conversation you're going to have with all the founders. And again, welcome to Iceland. And hopefully you take some great pictures. Thank you again.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.